This tutorial is going to show you how to make a cyanotype step by step. You will learn two different ways of making a successful cyanotype image. The first being a contact print of leaves or flowers, like the one on the left here. And the second way will be making digital negatives that will let us use our own digital images to make cyanotypes, such as the image on the right was taken from a digital file, made into a negative, and then printed out and used in the contact printing process. I have a separate video dedicated to making digital negatives on my channel. The link will come up on the screen at the relevant time. Before that, I'm going to show you how to do the method on the left. If you're interested in the history of cyanotypes, I'm going to post a few links in the description below that will let you investigate the early history of the process. Please look there for other useful links as well as all the products listed in this tutorial. So the first thing I'm going to go over is the shopping list. You will need certain items to do this correctly. Now, the majority of the items here you can get from one website, silverprint.co.uk. The first being a foam brush for coating the chemicals onto the surface of the paper. The second one being a mini scales, which is going to help you accurately measure all your chemicals. Now, first of the chemicals being ferric ammonium citrate. This is the smallest amount of this you can get, so it's the cheapest. Potassium ferricyanide is the other chemical that's crucial to make cyanotypes. Again, this is the smallest amount that they sell on this website, 100 grams. Now, if you want to do the process that I show you second, where we make digital negatives, this is what you would need to buy to do that. It's transparency film, also called digital transfer film. You can do it with normal acetate, but this is the best stuff to get really. It's probably the most expensive part of the process, but you don't have to do this part. It's optional really, but if you want to do that, then you can do. You also want to be having a look at getting some watercolor paper. That's generally the best thing to do a cyanotype on. If you want to try this process on fabric, you can do. It's exactly the same process, but you want to be using something like white fabric. So you could use a white t-shirt or a white hoodie or something like that. But you can get creative with that if you wish. This guide is going to be on how to do it with watercolor paper. So I would recommend maybe something like this one. It's fairly cheap. It's really good quality paper, but really you can use any watercolor paper you like. If you go down to your local craft store, Hobbycraft, The Range, something like that, then they will have something, if not the same, very, very similar. But what you're after is watercolor paper. Alongside watching this video, I would highly recommend checking out the website alternativephotography.com. If you look here under the cyanotype tab, they have an entire guide on everything you need with the process. Obviously, I'm going over it here as well, but this is a free PDF. You can have the first 20 pages, I think, for free, or you can purchase it for about £12. I used the free version and I found it a really, really helpful guide, especially as it's a PDF format that you can print out and it can go over all the steps, so you don't necessarily have to have your computer open all the time when you're doing this. You can have a paper guide with you while you're doing it. Okay, so to start the process, the first thing you're going to want to do is prepare your paper by coating it with the chemical. So to do that, we need to mix up some solution from the raw chemicals that you've ordered. The measurements I've used here is to make 15 milliliters of solution. That should be enough to coat quite a few pieces of A4 paper. I'd say about 5 to 10, depending on how thick you coat them. So here I've used 12.5 grams of ferric ammonium citrate, and that will be per 15 milliliters of water. It's a slightly different measurement for the potassium ferricyanide. We're going to use 5 grams per 50 milliliters of water. If you want to make more solution, all you need to do is double these values, so 25 grams for the first chemical and 10 grams for this chemical, and mix those with 100 mils of water each. Now you need to fully dissolve them in their own containers before you can use them. Always remember to wear gloves in this process. If you don't have access to any gloves, just be really careful not to get any of the chemicals on your hands and make sure you wash your hands afterwards. So this is what you'll end up with once you've mixed your chemicals. Two separate containers for the chemicals, your brushes and your watercolor paper. You can see here in this image I also have some hydrogen peroxide. This is for later on, and I will explain that when we come to it. So now what you want to do is take your chemicals and your paper and your brushes to a dark space. Once you're in a dark space, then you can mix the two chemicals together to form the actual solution you're going to use to coat the paper. On their own, the chemicals aren't sensitive to light, but together they are. Ideally, you'd be using a dark room with a red light. Understandably, a lot of people won't have access to that. You don't need it necessarily. You can just use a dark space. So you could, for example, close the curtains in a room, put a light on outside the room, and put the door ajar. So there's not lots of light in the room, but you can still see what you're doing. That would be absolutely fine. The important thing is once you've coated your paper, to let the paper dry in complete darkness for, I would say, 2 to 3 hours. If it's a warm day, it might happen a lot faster. Once your paper is dry, it's time to expose it to light. Now this is a UV light process, so the best time to do this is on a sunny day. Your exposure times are going to vary depending on how bright the sun is. If you have clouds moving past the sun intermittently, and the time of day as well. You might need to carefully pick the time of day you choose to expose your prints based on that. The website alternativephotography.com I mentioned earlier has got some really good information about exposure times and how to judge it yourself. This will also come with a bit of practice as well. So I recommend coating up quite a few sheets of paper before you start this. A good starting point for you, if it's a nice sunny day without any cloud, your exposure times will be in the 20-minute region. It might be worth leaving for around 25 minutes to ensure that you get a nice deep blue. You can see from my setup here, I'm using a piece of wooden board and I have sandwiched the paper and the negative in between the two to ensure good contact between the paper and the negative. If you want to learn how to make these digital negatives and you want to do this stage instead, click the link to the video coming up on the screen now, and that will teach you how to make these negatives from scratch. This is a simple homemade contact printer that we're using here. You don't have to make one of these. Simply an old picture frame will do the job, but preferably one with glass rather than acrylic, which would bend and not form a proper contact. When you do this with flowers, you don't even need the glass. You could just lay the paper down and then the leaves and the flowers on top of it, and then being careful not to move them during the exposure, you would still get a good result. And now I'm going to show you the time lapse of this print being exposed rather than making you wait the 20 minutes it took to expose. So now that the print has been exposed, it's time to develop it. All you need to do this stage is some water. We'll also be using hydrogen peroxide in this step. So we're just going to wash the print with fresh, clean water. We're going to give it one wash. What's going to happen here is the unexposed chemical is going to wash away into the water. And you can see that from the water going a slightly green lime colour. That's the unexposed chemical being washed away. So what we need to do here is use multiple changes of water. And you can see that we've got a nice print, but what we're going to do here is add in the hydrogen peroxide. Like I said, this is optional, but it's a really good stage to do because it can help you identify any problems with your exposure by bringing the print to full density immediately rather than needing to wait for the print to oxidize naturally. There we go, you can see that hydrogen peroxide taking effect there and giving us a much deeper blue, showing me that my exposure was good and I don't have to repeat it. After this, all you need to do is hang your print up to dry in the air and then you're finished. I'm also going to show you here in this video what you can expect when you do this same method using the leaves or flowers. And you can see here it's a little bit easier to see what's happening with a chemical when it's being exposed. So when it gets to this kind of stage, you know you're done. So here's the image that we developed, scanned into the computer so we can see it in a bit better detail. Now you can see here the kind of resolution we get from this image is really, really good. We can get some really, really good quality imagery using this method, especially when we're using the digital negatives. Now from here, we can use the digital file and we can actually do some editing with it if we wish to. Now, if you're looking to change the color of your cyanotype in Photoshop, that's a really simple and quick way you can do this. If you go to the bottom right of your screen and you add a new fill or adjustment layer just here, and you want to add hue and saturation. That'll bring you up a new layer, which you can then tweak the hue like this. And that will give you a different color completely to your cyanotype. Obviously this might not be the finished product, but say for example I wanted to make my image more on the purple side of things, I could choose something kind of around that there. From there, that's your base, so you can work from there and you can make things a bit more subtle if you wish. So I could go on from there and I could add another adjustment layer, and that could be levels, for example. And from there I can independently adjust the shadows, the dark areas, the midtones, and the highlights independently. So I can use those sliders to adjust the black point, the white point, and the midtones. I can also go back into my hue and saturation layer by double clicking here to open the properties menu. I can then reduce the saturation, which will make that effect look more natural, as if you have used a purple dye, for example. If you choose to do this, really important to remember, when you save your image, give it a new name. So for this one, I would call it cyanotype purple, for example, so that it doesn't save over the original image. And that's it for now. Please see the description below for all the different products, websites and videos that I've referenced. Remember that this will take a little bit of trial and error. So coat lots of paper in one go with the chemicals that you've mixed up. So when it's dry, you can go ahead and try lots of different exposures and techniques and images, and have fun with it, guys.